Once upon a chilly evening, as the twilight skies wrapped themselves in shades of indigo, let's tiptoe back in time to an era when women's figure skating wasn't just a dance on ice, but a delicate ballet of cunning compliance and peculiar dress codes. Picture, if you will, the icy expanse of the Olympic rink, filled with an air of anticipatory grace. Yet, beneath the frosty facade of ice and sequins, there were secrets, a web of regulations woven with all the subtlety of an overzealous Victorian butler. In the early days of women's Olympic skating, everything from the specific lace pattern on the skater's attire to the precise degree of their blades was governed by rules that seemed to emerge from the minds of those more suited for arranging elaborate tea parties. For instance, women were required to wear long skirts that extended below the knee, which, if you've ever tried to glide on ice while dodging a looming wardrobe malfunction, you know is no small feat. Imagine spinning gracefully, only to become ensnarled by your own hem, a fashion disaster waiting to happen on a slippery stage. The rules extended beyond mere attire. The performances had to be, shall we say, demure and respectful. Judges of yore were quick to wag a reproving finger at anything too exuberant. No fancy backflips or overly spirited gestures. Instead, something akin to gliding through a genteel garden party on ice was expected. This was a time when modesty danced hand in hand with ice shavings, where a misplaced twirl could scandalize onlookers more dramatically than a loose cravat at a Regency ball. And oh, let's not forget the judges. Silent adjudicators, clad in sensible wool, perched at rinkside like statues of severe owls. They wielded their scorecards with the solemnity of abbots, ready to pass judgment on any breach of these intricate rules. An ill-timed lift of an arm or an ankle that dared to show itself would lead to a score that could chill even the most seasoned skater's heart. In the midst of such stringent sporting propriety, there were the pioneers, women whose skate blades whispered of silent rebellions. Over time, they chipped away at these musty regulations, introducing sparkles of innovation and boldness. Bit by bit, they dared to shorten those skirts and lace those boots with a bit more devil-may-care flair, bending the frozen orthodoxy until it was pliant enough to waltz to their own rhythm. The courage it must have taken to push against those norms, to skate not just for medals, but for a modicum of liberty on ice, is something to marvel at as the night deepens. And while we drift toward dreamland, the quiet rustle of history assures us that, before they knew it, those pioneer skaters had laid the groundwork for modern champions who twirl to their own music. If these stories help you drift off, please subscribe to the channel. It would mean the world to me. And before you fully fade into dreamland, I would love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, let's close our eyes and imagine the icy echoes of those first rebellious skate blades as they glide us gently toward tomorrow's chapter. Ah, the world of ice skating, where elegance meets physics on a surface where most of us struggle to walk, let alone glide. In our dreamy descent into the history of Olympic figure skating, you'll find that tulle and sequins were just the tip of the iceberg, pun intended, for women who were part of this elite, chilly domain. Snuggle down and imagine the curious spectacle. Athletes who could practically levitate with grace, all while adhering to some truly odd regulations that were enough to make the mind of a Victorian librarian spin. Once upon a time, in an era when wearing pants was considered scandalous and most folks thought surfing the internet meant actually surfing, women ice skaters had to participate in a grand dance not just on the ice, but with the rule book itself. It wasn't enough to master triple axels or the swan-like posing. No, these daring dames faced a set of rules as intense as any triple lutz, etched with precision and perhaps a touch of Victorian prudishness. The outfits alone were a masterpiece of restriction. Designs had to cover the knees, you see, lest a glimpse of anything more risque than a shin causes an international incident. Imagine trying to execute a flawless spin while burdened with layers of thick woolen fabric, which itches with the ferocity of 1,000 bee stings. Seriously, It's hard to twirl artistically when you're worried about starting a fire with all that static electricity. And colors were not a thing yet, not unless you consider shades of drab to be a rainbow. If a skater's ensemble popped with vibrancy, you'd assume they were committing some bright and glaring faux pas. As for the music that blessed their routines, well, let's say anything peppy like jazz was considered too risque for these genteel gatherings. If you wanted to swing like a top but, heaven forbid, swing to a tune that might induce toe tapping, you'd find yourself skating to something predictably classical, as nodding off in your chair to Tchaikovsky was infinitely preferable to being tempted to bob along to a lively beat. Governing bodies kept it neatly tied up in a symphonic cocoon, ensuring that no stray cadenza dared to entice a foot tap. This wasn't merely a sport. Ladies and gents, it was synchronized swoon endurance, a discipline where competitors needed the talent of a ballet dancer and the compliance of a regimented soldier. Anything too outlandish, a hint of shoulder here, a musical note too jazzy there, might trigger censure as swift as the cut of a skate on fresh ice. But let's not forget the ingenuity these women exhibited under such constraints. Like silent film stars who had to captivate without sound, female skaters developed an uncanny ability to channel their inner swans without ruffling any regulatory feathers. Their every move concealed a rebellious flair, smooth and subtle like the velvet upon which they floated, hinting at a spirit untamed by merely terrestrial laws. As you drift away into a dreamy slumber, if you feel a warm admiration slipping under your quilt, you're not alone. The tales of these pioneering skaters are a gentle reminder that art, beauty, and the courage to twirl against the tide all find a way. A gentle pirouette out of strict confines and onto paths forged of elegance and quietly rebellious spirit. So, dear listener, as your heavy eyelids start to win their battle against consciousness, remember the indomitable women of the ice. May your dreams glide as effortlessly, perhaps guided by the subtle strains of a melody not so bound by orchestrated decree, leading you softly into chapter after delicious chapter of culinary skating history yet to unfold. As the moon lazily drifts overhead and you find yourself sinking deeper into your plush pillows, let us journey together to the shimmering world of Olympic ice skating, a domain filled with glittering costumes, sequined serenades, and remarkably daunting rules. Floating gracefully on the horizon of history, we uncover the story of how women's Olympic skating was once regulated by rules so strict, you'd think they were sketched by a particularly fastidious fairy godmother. Gather round as we glide dreamily back to an era where the dizzying swirl of a sequined skirt was less about personal expression and more about maintaining one's decency, at least according to the stalwarts of Olympic propriety. Back in the early days, the time-honored tradition of ladies ice skating wasn't merely about who could execute the most triple axels without resembling a whirling dervish of sequins and sabots. No, my dear listener, it was as much about covering one's ankles as it was about crafting the perfect spiral. Imagine, if you will, dainty skaters on ice, required to wear skirts so long that, should a mischievous breeze dare arise, it would scarcely make an appearance on stage. The lengths of these skirts were the hallmark of primness, a fabric-laden measure meant to ward off scandal and slip-ups, both of the slipping fabric variety and, one assumes, etiquette. These ankle-hugging sartorial choices were not just about insulation from the chills but from the gasp-inducing breeze of public censure. Slipping through the corridors of Olympic rulebooks, we find delightful gems like the restrictions on costume colors. Think of this as a painter's nightmare, or perhaps a minimalist's dream come true. Only pastel shades were worthy of the ice. Why, you ask? Because it was widely held that anything as audacious as ruby red or sapphire blue could distract the audience, who might gasp in unison, "Oh my, is that Bordeaux or plum?" Competitors floated like pastel clouds, delicate as the dawn, as if the ice were a giant birthday cake on which only the gentlest sprinkles were welcome. Moving from skirts to stockings, the regulations were nothing short of a hosiery enthusiast's wildest dictionary of nightmares. Stockings, for instance, had to be a certain color, often dictated by rules that might have seemed as capricious as the frost itself. The ruling powers wished to see graceful silhouettes rather than revolutionary legs. And then there were the fascinating mandates for makeup, or the lack thereof. Olympic skaters in the yesteryears might have thought twice before reaching for a lipstick. The stoic councils who adorned the rinks with regulations believed that the natural bloom of youthful cheeks to be sufficient decoration against the cold canvas of ice. A swathe of crimson lips might have been seen as bold, perhaps even radical, as if our skaters were starring in a cinematic espionage drama rather than spinning through a winter sport. Oh, but the constraints did not end there, for accessories were closely monitored like precious artifacts. Earrings? Only the most modest, subtle pieces, if at all. One had to be cautious, lest the twinkle of a diamond might cause the audience to imperceptibly blink, missing a crucial spin. It truly was a realm where discipline was worn as tightly as a snug boot, and the rulebook read like the winter edition of a debutante's ball guide. These olden rules, in their whimsical rigidity, were perhaps an ode to an era longing for grace, tradition, and predictability spoken through icy passages. Yet despite the constraints and curious conventions, the skaters captivated with every leap, bringing their unique artistry and quiet defiance to an audience enthralled. As we gently glide forward on the iceberg of slumber, our next tale promises to untangle the colorful tapestries of skating further. Drift softly now, letting images of gliding elegance guide you deeper as the moonlight lulls your eyelids into a serene close. In the land of twirling sequins and confounding spins, where snowflakes hallelujah to the ground in perfect synchronicity with the clink of cold metals, lies the occasionally somber yet always fascinating history of women's Olympic figure skating. And there, gently pirouetting between the Arctic air and warm applause of the spectators, were strict rules that steered the destiny of the ladies who laced up their boots to glide upon the ice. Now imagine, if you will, the scene at the inaugural Olympic Winter Games in 1924. The slopes of Chamonix, France were festive with winter's clothing, and competitors prepared somewhat bemused to skate on an open rink, built more for romantic ice frolicking than for the gracious pirouettes they intended to show. It was here that women appeared in their shimmering costumes, partially designed, one might suspect, to prevent winter hypothermia more than to dazzle the crowd. In the tableau of these early years, one peculiar rule shimmered like the northern lights: the requirement that skating dresses be modest. Some say the rule's birth was less about virtue and more due to 1924's frosty temperatures, which demanded the covering of more acres of skin. Heaven forbid anyone suffer pneumonia right before the interpretive free skate. As time progressed and the 1930s flappers dazzled the world in fringes and bobbed hairdos, skating dresses followed suit with hemlines that scandalously skimmed the knee. Well, if we dare imagine scandalous knees. Yet, even these intrepid flapper skaters were not free from sartorial shackles. Hemlines could tempt, but décolletage was deemed a treacherous descent. Oh, the euphoric delight of competing while moderately chaste. And as we waltzed into the mid-century, the 1950s blessed the world with its tangled Cold War dichotomies and the choreographing of riskier movements like the single lutz, which up until then was regarded as frightfully reckless. With these sport innovations, the International Skating Union, ISU, tightened its script on who could dazzle and how they might do it without thrill or frill. It was not only the aesthetic boundaries that were firmly penned onto rules of the rinks, but the manner of skate itself. Women were advised to maintain an image of grace and elegance, because heaven forbid anything too aerobic or exuberant should besmirch the dignity of a lady skater. Double axels teetered on the brink of propriety. Triple jumps were not only extraordinary, but extraordinarily brash. In a swirl of snow and tradition, there emerged the steel-tempered spirit required by each skater to navigate these circumscribed waters. A woman had to embody both the poise of a regal swan and the cunning of a fox, ensuring each leap and twirl met the lofty statutes of the Olympic realms. It was a delicate dance, to say the least, like threading a needle while ice dancing blindfolded. But if nobler souls awaited a freer spirit on ice, it would not be until the 1980s that a true gust of change would sweep up through. Politely sidestepping such overly tempestuous topics, the ISU eventually began to unlace its skates of severity, albeit ever so reluctantly. Here, we encountered a fascinating contradiction, where strategic perfection was not always about the perfect jump, but occasionally about the perfect balance between adherence and allure. A world away from these constraints, the quietly rebellious blades of skaters began tracing new paths across the ice. Hearts and applause melted in unison, as if whispering a cheeky, warm "oops" to the fussy rules that dared to confine them. So let us now draw back the curtain ever so slightly, as we cozy deeply into the tale of what myriad mischief and masterful storytelling the history of skating rules holds next. But for now, let us pause and drift into a restful glide, the future of our frosty tale awaiting just beyond the horizon, as dawn's delicate fingers brush the icy surfaces of the 1960s Olympic skating rinks. An informal meeting of world-class figure skaters took place in a small cafe tucked away in the corner of Europe. The gathering was shrouded in secrecy, as if it were a clandestine assembly of spy ring leaders rather than a group of ladies adorned in glitter and velvet. Over steaming cups of cocoa, they courageously defied the domineering forces that dictated their attire, much like a gaggle of glittering revolutionaries plotting a rhinestone-paved rebellion. In the age when women's Olympic skating was governed more stringently than a royal wedding guest list, the sartorial guidelines were as precise as an engineer's diagram. Dresses were expected to be modest enough to keep scandal at bay, no shorter than 3/4 down the thigh, and always with sleeves stitched, as if every elbow was teaching a lesson in decorum. Skating there was less about the performance and more about maintaining the illusion that, should they fall, these athletes might actually bounce back, courtesy of their abundant layers of tulle. Now, as you sink further into your cocoon of blankets, it may tickle your mind to learn that beneath the smiles and triple axels, whispers of revolution were brewing within this small cohort. They questioned whether avoiding a nip slip on the ice was truly more important than perfecting the angle of a Lutz. For every spin achieved and every leap mastered, they mused that perhaps, just perhaps, these rules were not born of common sense, but of a bygone era's sense of propriety. Enter stage left, one of skating's quirkiest unsung heroines, Joy Blackwell, whose mere presence could send an Arctic breeze scattering across an audience. Watching from afar as crimson and white costume judges squirm in their seats, Joy became famous, not just for her skating prowess, but for her daring to wear costumes that skimmed a bit less fabric over her athletic frame. Her cheeky displays and rebellious charm earned her the nickname the Fashion Felon of the Ice, a moniker she wore with pride, sparking imaginations and sending shockwaves through the otherwise prim world of figure skating. Her fellow skaters could only muster gentle gasps, wide-eyed as kittens, discovering the world outside their basket. Still, they internally conjured visions of floating across the ice in something slightly more freeing, a costume without having to add layers of blush to imitate some royal order of the Sphinx. The relaxation of rules would take years, of course, trickling down like syrup on a stack of pancakes on a lazy Sunday morning. However, Joy's audacious displays on the Olympic ice highlighted a comedic realization. Comfort, mobility, and a smidge of personality were not mutually exclusive. Slowly, the powers that be started to recognize that exaggerating curves with 100 more sequins did not in fact aid velocity, nor did an extra inch of lace catch the sunlight in any helpful way. With the delectable irony that delights the fates, the very act of skating itself became the quiet revolution. The skaters, in defying the uniform drabness, were elegantly declaring in silent gracefulness, "We shall be dynamic in both gold and turquoise." They carved their paths in the gleaming ice, painting stories of courage beneath overhead rink lights, ever whispering against the silence. As the conversation drew to a close in our cozy cafe, Joy set down her mug, deciding she'd strike once more against convention. "Ladies," she murmured, her words as calm as your steady breaths, "let's show them what a true artist dressed by choice, rather than tradition, can do." Her words, half challenge, half conviction, left a sense of warmth in the room, like notes from a lullaby hanging gently in the air. As the cafe's door swung open to let in a crisp breeze, you can almost feel it softly nudging you onward, as dreams swept through the night, to prepare the stage for tales whispered unto a gentle dawn. Once upon a time, in a world spun on blades of elegance and grace, the element of silent rebellion glided quietly beneath the surface of Olympic ice rinks. Picture this: a time when figure skating was as much about hoops and hems as it was about artistic spins and competitive spirals. The era was not too far off, but just near enough to whisper its rules into the vestibule of your imagination while you comfortably snuggle deeper under the coziness of your sheets. In days gone by, there was a unique chapter in the playbook of Olympic figure skating rules for women, one not often read aloud, but hummed quietly in the background. To start off, one must imagine a costume measuring stick, standing tall like a stoic schoolmaster, ensuring skirts were never shorter than allowed, ever vigilant of hemlines, attempting any sort of impertinent climb above the knee. This wardrobe code of conduct was, of course, woven from the fabric of what was considered decorum by the guardians of tradition. And oh, the sleeves, a spectacular dilemma in themselves. Shoulders were to be modestly covered, no feathery extravagances like you might see on today's glittering ice platforms. Apart from adding that tantalizing hint of darling drama should they slip upwards just a bit too far, these sleeves were all about memo and moral, not marvelous movement. It was essential that all dressed to impress, but in a manner ostensibly rooted in quiet understatement, a paradox lost to no one except, perhaps, the judges. Now imagine this scenario. A skater, queuing up to challenge norms one twirl at a time, approaches the judicious gaze of the Olympic ice. Her outfit, crafted as a tapestry of glamorous defiance, reflects shapes more aligned to a less constricting century. Yet she's suddenly accosted, not unlike a heroine in a melodrama, ushered aside for an ode to the outraged tailor. A test of restraint follows, as lengths and layers are declared, adjusted, restitched. And herein lay a touch of irony, perhaps, for all their concern over inch and insulation. Less attention might have been afforded to the somewhat alarmingly colourful scarves of male spectators in the front row, which swirled with a flamboyance no skirt could ever aspire to challenge. The balancing act, much like a triple axel, was fraught with peril, but navigated deftly by women who were nothing if not innovative in their obligatory conformity. Speaking of artwork on blades, though the artwork of landing a clean triple salchow or a lutz is critical, one found that music choice was equally intriguing, wrapped in unwritten clauses. Tunes had to be as elegant as the routines, though even then, what counted as too jaunty was a matter of great debate. Imagine vying for gold while discreetly lobbying for Bach over Beyoncé, a melodious legacy from an era valuing classical restraint over modern resonance. As night descends more profoundly around us, one might ponder how these restrictive lines slowly transformed, like an introspective epilogue written not with ink, but with freedom's brush. As boundaries began to thaw like the frosty tendrils of first light, drastic debates over costumes led to more expressive choices, paving the ice, so to speak, for bolder colors, for daring cuts, for a pageantry twirling towards passionate freedoms. And thus, these stories of sartorial supervision underpin a broader narrative, the harmonious dance between adherence and artistry, between regulation and revolt. Imagine these tales as a gentle snowfall, flake by flake falling upon your listening ears, inviting you to understand the past not just through facts, but through the mesmerizing ballet of history's quiet arguments. As we sway gently towards the twilight horizon of this evening's whispering history, let these visions of skating ancestors inspire visions in your dreams, spinning you softly into a landscape where ice is the mirror of storied skies and blades etch the timeless beauty of flight. there's more to come, dear dreamer, as we continue, sliding through the enchanting stories of a sport brushed by the wings of time. In the gentle swirl of history's peculiarities, it seems quite fitting to pause and hurl ourselves like a triple axel into the colourful world of women's Olympic figure skating. Here, it might surprise you to learn the ice has not always been as slippery as one might believe, at least when it comes to the rules governing the very women who glided upon it. Our story drifts to the early 20th century, when skating was more than a sport. It was an elegant dance frozen in time, complete with all the societal frills and restrictions of its day. In an era when hats were mandatory and gloves de rigueur, figure skating was no exception to the rigorous expectations of ladylike conduct. As we lace up this tale, picture, if you will, Lady Margaret Smith Crottinger, a fictitious yet quintessentially proper aspirant of Olympic skating fame, whose parlour was as likely to discuss a slight twist variation of the axel jump as it was flower arrangements. Imagine her alarm when confronted by a particularly peculiar rule from the 1930s. No part of the costume, assuredly elegant and of good taste, should be cut too low or expose too much of the arm, or, heaven forbid, the very knee. Ah yes, the genteel knee, as rare a sight as the elusive yeti in polite society. A glimpse of it on the Olympic ice might cause Aunt Prudence to spill her embroidery thread straight into her Earl Grey. And yet, our gallant skaters complied. Their performances became a ballet of skill and modesty, all under the scrutinizing eyes of judges who held scorecards in one hand and social decorum books in the other. It's not often one thinks of a judge worrying about the scandalous angles of an arm swing while marking a perfect lutz. But history, dear listener, is nothing if not thorough. The constraints, however, did not end draped over the shoulders of intrepid skating dresses. Bespoke tailoring extends into the bizarre depths of figure skating music, which bore its own set of chaperoned rules. Tunes must remain classical, tasteful, and devoid of any unnerving jazz influence, lest they distract from the pure elegance of the swirling skaters. Heaven forfend if a trumpeter's syncopation might lead to a harmonically disastrous twizzle on the ice. Even the blades that whispered across the frosty stage were subject to their share of scrutiny. One wouldn't want overly modern gadgets to upset the timeless elegance of the sport. Thus, the tinkering tinkers amongst skaters were quietly reminded to respect the sobriety of the sport by keeping their blades sharp but humble, a charm akin to the perfect marmalade toast. But while the rules painted a formidable, if somewhat restrictive, landscape for women skaters, they were originally crafted with the staunch belief that they were refining a gentlewoman's craft. Society demanded refinement, elegance, and, perhaps most importantly, that understated trick of knowing precisely when to smile through one's pearls when skating through a successful salchow. And so, Lady Margaret and her very real contemporaries twirled and leapt within the demanding embrace of these rules, crafting ephemeral cathedrals of ice and grace. Each rule, no matter how whimsical it may seem to us now, was another indenture into the alabaster pages of the sport, giving rise to the skaters of today who dance with both freedom and a nod of gratitude to their spangled yet constrained forerunners. As we move past the rink of history's quieter whispers, let us glide softly onto the broader tales of ambition, unexpected triumphs, and more tantalizing secrets. There, in the hushed dreams of yesteryears on ice, our skaters step gracefully into our next chapter, leaving behind trails of silken ice and polished tales for us to follow. Now, dear listener, as the moon gently watches over the peaceful fans of figure skating, let us glide into the icy stage of the 1960s and 70s, a peculiar time where fashion met fierce critique, and not just of the quadruple axel variety. Imagine, if you will, a world where the height of elegance balanced precariously on the uncertain wobbles of society's skittish expectations. Welcome to the glamorous yet restrictive corridors of women's Olympic figure skating, where spectacle was as much a part of the sport as precision and grace. Picture a crisp, wintry morning, the kind that makes a cup of hot cocoa and a cozy blanket feel more like a necessity than a nicety. Take a sip as we imagine ourselves back at the Olympic ice, serenely gliding through history while keeping an eye out for the sartorial minefield. You see, back then, female skaters had to work their artistic magic within the constraints of both literal and metaphorical corsets. Ah, the skating costumes, a dazzling world of sparkles, sequins, and silently enforced decorum. You wouldn't think a few yards of fabric could cause quite such a stir. But oh, the drama they spun around. In a time when hemlines could make or break a stellar triple lutz, skaters' skirts were bound by regulations almost as rigid as a top-tier coach's opinions on musical interpretation. These sartorial stipulations dictated that skirts must be long enough to conceal the athletic secrets that lay underneath, yet short enough to showcase the grace of youthful exuberance. This wasn't just a costume, it was the tightrope beneath a microscope. Those spirited lady skaters, donning their hand-beaded homages to disciplined femininity, were expected to glimmer with elegance and yet hover just above the realm of scandalously modern. The unyielding rulers outlining appropriate attires could, quite literally, leave the competition out in the cold should they dare to err on the side of too daring. As if mastering figure eights wasn't enough, they had to tiptoe through these wardrobe regulations with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. Thankfully, sleepily, tucked beneath layers of chiffon and lace, the wit and creativity of these women shone gently through. They managed to bend, not break, the rules with clever flair. Ingenious use of color and form, alongside clever subtleties in design, allowed them to express a hint of their vibrant personalities, all while keeping one skate firmly on the ice of propriety. Their costumes were masterpieces of diplomacy, a silent negotiation with the unyielding directives wielded by the spear-wielding guardians of tradition who fancied themselves more in the line of decorum defenders. Now, lean back comfortably, because like a graceful spin, there's an amusing twist. There was, believe it or not, a strictly upheld notion that seeped its way into the regulations, rules about women's hair. Yes, styles varied from elegant buns that whispered sophistication to curls that bounced with gleeful defiance against the solemnity of history. Yet strands out of place were nigh inexcusable, as if a single rebellious curl bore the power to unravel the very fabric of sportsmanship in that chilly auditorium. In those days, elegance translated into an art form that was externally flawless. But oh, how they danced around those hidden rules with subtlety, a strand of hair tweaking destiny just enough to ensure a personal expression survived amidst the aroma of conformity. One might even argue that crafting art within such constraints was its own form of defiance, a quiet rebellion against the uniformity of sparkly customs. As you drift upon an ice flow of imagination, pondering that era of hidden whispers woven in tulle and silk, envision how times change, yet originality perpetually finds a breath of existence within rigid expectations. Feel inspired, not only by their strides and stumbles on ice, but also by their silent victories over the unseemly weight of invisible, historical fig leaves. Carefully cradled in this paradox of rigidity and artistry, our journey glides us smoothly toward the next whimsical episode, shimmering with stories equally enchanting and bedecked with humor. Let yourself be softly carried forward, as if borne upon gossamer skates beneath the caress of an ever-watching moon, into evermore tapestry-embroidered tales. Ah, the life of an Olympic figure skater. Glamour on ice, a whirlwind of sequins and pirouettes, with an extra side of strict rules and regulations. It's like a fantasy for anyone who enjoys the thought of mixing elegant athleticism with a dash of Shakespearean drama, minus the historical sword fights. But let us glide you back through the frosty corridors of time with a lightly sharpened poetic pen, as we explore some rules from yesteryears that govern the lives of female Olympic skaters. Imagine, if you will, a snowy morning before the spring thaw of 1936. Somewhere on yet another glacially brilliant stage, a group of skaters approach the rink with the excited, yet poised energy of enchanted gazelles. Their skates shimmered as tiny metallic pirouettes, eager to leave their own artistic signature on frozen water. Yet the air was heavy, much like pomade in an untamed mustache, with unspoken regulations that frame every toe loop and lutz. Step back, if you please, to the sartorial decrees. While one might think the attire of a figure skater is merely an artistic choice, in those days it was a matter of supreme importance, governed by a morality code sterner than a librarian's eyebrow. Dresses apparently had rules to follow, even if the ice was an anarchist's playground. Hemlines huddled demurely at knee length or lower, defying aerodynamics in a way that even bats with fashion aspirations would shake their heads in disbelief. Anything above was considered a scandal, attracting the judges' stern gazes more critically than a lutz gone wrong. In parallel ballet steps, the hair was another battleground for class and composure, often resembling a perfectly chiseled sculpture of snowflakes rather than wind-swept creativity. The hairstyles were like helmets of grace, obedient to gravity's whisper, ensuring not even a rogue curl would say, "I'll glide my own way, thanks." And then, of course, there were the anticipated dramatics of music selection. Skaters were made to glide harmoniously to classical symphonies and balletic numbers. It was the era where the rebellious skater who dared to imagine a dazzling leap to anything more upbeat than a trotting waltz might have been shunned as an aesthetic revolutionary. Alas, a punishing oboe or demanding cello dictated not just rhythm, but also the seriousness of pursuit, proving one could dance with chastity, even on ice. Beyond the rink, the restrictions extended like a winter shadow, loitering in their personal lives, determining the narrative as much as their technical spins. Women skaters were expected to maintain an image of demure elegance at all times. Crowds gathered not just to witness athletic prowess, but ladylike decorum worthy of a dinner with the emperor himself, albeit served with a side of powdered snow instead of pheasant under glass. A regulation as slippery as an unsalted path involved not only how these athletes performed, but how they carried themselves outside the icy embrace. Social activities were monitored with the hawkish eye of a ballet instructor fearing goulash stains or improper suitors. Should a skater be seen holding hands with a man who hadn't been vetted through diplomatic channels? For that could incite quite the artistic scandal. As we hold the lantern aloft over these decrees, let's admire how far we've glided since those days of antiquated expectations. Modern skaters, while still swathed in structured tradition, are given the latitude of personal expression, a rhapsody of spins and flips, with one's choice of flamboyant costume and extraterrestrial techno beats or eclectic tango rhythms. With each revolution on the ice, the craft was forged anew, embodying the same grace, yet loosening the stitches of old formalities. As we find our imaginations gently skating to a serene halt at this chapter's end, take a moment to dreamily appreciate how the ice continues to thaw beneath the crystal-cut chevrons of history. And thus, as the frieze melts into mist, we hint at a flicker of what lies beyond this serene moment, a tale unfolding like nature's rhyme, waiting for us in tomorrow's moonlit glow. Picture a gentle snowstorm, with soft flakes drifting down as we glide into the intricacies of Olympic figure skating, a sport where emotion meets ice and grace meets grit. Imagine, if you will, a setting where glistening sequins not only catch the light, but also reflect the many illustrious and sometimes peculiar, unwritten rules that have shaped it. As we enter the realm of figure skating in the mid-20th century, it's hard to miss the echo of pearls clutching and skirts swirling in a delicate dance of dictated decorum. This captivating arena, the underlying screenplay was written with as much precision as a skater's toe pick swipes on ice. Diving into the skating world of yore, it becomes apparent that skaters didn't just practice triple axels, but also mastered the art of perfect posture, where even the backflip, a crowd favorite flourish, was once squarely frowned upon as ungallant and, frankly, too thrilling. Back then, landing a solid double jump wasn't just about physics. It was about doing it with a dainty flourish that could rival any genteel afternoon tea. Costumes were no less an essential part of a skater's regimen than the sight spin. With a guiding hand hovering somewhere between modesty and mirth, designers were tasked with towing the delicate line of propriety. Think of it as evoking a chiffon cloud that whips around without quite revealing what makes a cloud float. Designers were entrusted to ensure that skaters looked ethereal, spared from any accusations of scandal that could be waywardly invited by a rebellious gown slipping an inch too high. High fashion skepticism aside, there was a certain unfussy technicality about these ensembles. It's easy to overlook that skaters had to seamlessly balance elegance with mobility, an art unto itself. Imagine executing a flawless lutz without accidentally crowning yourself with your own tiara. Not a gold medal category perhaps, but surely deserving of accolades. Turning our glance to another quirk of historical polish, consider the soundtrack of skating competitions. The melodies that floated from crackling speakers had to bandage the air with respectability. Here, Chopin and Tchaikovsky found themselves unexpected, eternal partners to lutz jumps and camel spins. The rulebooks were unfaltering. Music should stir the soul, though preferably not excessively. Heaven forbid a skater's music choice should be anything too jaunty, or worse, avant-garde. Judges, too, held paramount positions not simply for their scores, but for their ability to deftly channel the era's zeitgeist. Their role was akin to gatekeepers of elegance, keenly observing every arabesque and layback spin for signs of brilliance or frivolity. The competitive spirit was seen through a refined lens, rendering not only technical proficiency, but the elevation of performance art to near ballet-like heights. Behind it all were the unseen lengths to which skaters pushed themselves, as dreams of Olympic glory coaxed them onto icy stages time and again. Despite constrictions, these athletes harnessed wit and creativity to craft performances that tiptoed right up to the line of acceptability and occasionally backflipped over it, albeit ever so discreetly. Thus, under the icy spotlight, figure skating revealed itself as artfully poised on paradox. Skaters respected the constraints, but flirted with boundaries, all while making it look as simple as slipping into one's favorite bedtime tale. These graceful women forged paths on frosted canvases that sparkled under both the sun and scrutiny. And so, once the sequined costumes were back in their cases and the melodies faded into memory, one might venture that there was something charming in the bureaucratic dance of tradition. Lovingly, tucked behind each spiraling performance was the whisper of history, guiding twists and twirls with the elegance of a lullaby, both strange and soothing. We now leave you lulled by the soft, graceful echoes on the ice, as we drift gently toward another chapter's close, following the smooth glissando of history's quiet song. As we delicately glide into the world of Olympic ice skating, let's pause to admire the invisible hand of history, which, with great enthusiasm and no lack of irony, has shaped a sport that sparkles with sequins and improbably large amounts of hairspray. For decades, women figure skaters have mastered not only the triple axel, but also the more nebulous art of navigating a labyrinth of meticulous rules, some of which could have curled a judge's moustache in disbelief. These rules, however, were not merely constraints, but rather a quirky script for a cinematic performance on ice, filled with surprising pre-intermission commercials for legislation in taste and decorum. In the golden era of skating, aspirants were not only expected to land their loops and spirals, but also adhere to an astonishingly anachronistic dress code. Dresses had to float demurely above the knees, ensuring that any glimpse of a kneecap remained as rare as an unblemished white peacock. The skirts had to billow modestly, an act of choreography in itself, as if the fabric were signaling a genteel hello to gravity every time a skater leapt skyward. Of course, the sartorial splendor didn't end with the dress length. For many years, regulations also extended their dignified fingers to the choice of fabric and even the height of the skate's boot, as if to say, "Ladies, take heed, for your outfit must befit not only the artistry but the aristocracy of ice." The fact that skaters could still maintain dazzling elegance while their attire was scrutinized with an attention to detail that one might reserve for a Renaissance painting is nothing short of a spiral in itself. And let's not forget the role of music in this icy ballet. There was a time when loud modern beats were considered quite scandalous. Imagine the horror a judge would experience upon hearing anything with an electric guitar screeching across the speakers. The musical selection had to remain as refined as an afternoon tea, lest you risk the terrifying scandal of a raised eyebrow, or even more spine-chilling, a deducted point. The intricacies of the skating world extended beyond mere appearance and into the realm of etiquette with rules that regulated behavior. Who could forget the moment rumored in hushed whispers where a polite nod replaced a dramatic arm flourish in celebrating a perfect landing? Enthusiasm, it seems, was meant to secret twinkle within, like a politely contained yet ever-present twinkling star, lighting up the skater's core, but never spilling out into the delightfully chaotic grandeur we witness today. Financial burdens also indiscriminately laid their frosty hands upon the sport, further encumbering its athletes. Many a skater found themselves in a precarious dance with they who controlled the purse strings, as funding for skaters was less of a polite waltz and more an elaborate tango with fundraising committees. These efforts were fueled by the need to afford costumes ornate enough to entice, while still obeying the rules swirling around them. Perhaps appropriately, this part of history also involved a full set of complementary, finger-wagging budget spreadsheets, which may have as well been as much a staple once as our skates today. As we continue to reflect on this tapestry woven with threads of athletic grace and volleys over Velcro skirts, one could wonder if the icy arena was the true architect of change. For as the frosty crystals flew and laces were tightened, young skaters dreamed not just of twirling triumphantly, but perhaps of a world where that old-fashioned nod might one day be replaced with a victorious whoop and a double-handed wave. Oh, the delightful impropriety. And so, in this magical whirl, a timeless blizzard of old rules and budding dreams, a finely embroidered narrative of femininity, sportsmanship, and spandex-encased tenacity begins to unfold. Let us quietly bid adieu to this chapter as we lace up our imagination for what lies beneath the cold, glittering veil of history. Now, as our skates glide smoothly onward, listen closely for the tale that awaits just beyond the next snowy drift. As the moonlight danced over frozen lakes and icy rinks, glistening like a million tiny diamonds, women's Olympic skating in the early years was, oddly enough, more about the glint of a well-placed hairpin than the gleam of a gold medal. Picture this, a serene scene where skaters glided effortlessly, dresses subdued by society's stern approval, and fabric flutters were strategically calculated to remain modest against the whispering ice breezes. In an era not too distant and yet quaintly detached from the present, skirt lengths were not just a fashion choice for Olympic skaters, but a rigid regulation. The respected judges, with their solemn expressions and impeccable monocles, like overly serious owls, enforced that a lady's skirt should not rise above the knee. Were a skirt to billow impertinently, as skirts are wont to do during a triple axel, a skating siren could face disqualification. Imagine the split second of rebellion as fabric arrogantly defied gravity, reaching for freedom beyond the dictates of the skating officials and ultimately sealing a skater's fate with steadfastness as firm as a wintry breeze's bite. Not content with merely governing hemlines, the powers that be were equally persistent about a skater's demeanor on ice. Unlike the sporting spirit of today's skate dancers, who explode into a joyful whirl of sparkles and sequins, they were expected to appear as poised as a queen at a garden party. Smiling too wildly or showing excessive exuberance was viewed as far too modern and, dare we say, a bit scandalous. It was imperative to maintain an enigmatic serenity, as if channeling a composed noblewoman during an elaborate afternoon tea. And then there were the gloves. Ah, yes, the pivotal gloves. Customarily, a skater's delicate hands should always remain encapsulated in the fabric of dainty gloves. For it was believed that should they appear bare, exposed to the frosty air, it might distract viewers with unsightly chapped knuckles or even the possibility of an endearing wave gone rogue. But it's with hair that these early regulations took on a fastidious life of their own. The hair debate could make even the most stoic of judges nod in grave approval. Women's Olympic hair was curated with the artistic precision of a Renaissance masterpiece. Stray strands were as unwelcome as penalty points. Each coiffed lock was to remain in place, like soldiers standing alert, lest chaos ensue on that pivotal triple Lutz. To ensure this, helmets of hairspray accompanied each daring leap and twirl, a veritable fog that preserved the dignity of coiffures like a frozen time capsule. Lest you think skaters suffocated under these strangling rules. Well, okay, maybe they did just a tad. Some quietly rebelled. Cleverly, small loopholes allowed a hint of personalization, perhaps a daring color or a hint of sparkle added clandestinely to a glove. Channeling against the norm audacity, hairstyles were sometimes teased a little higher, or skirts whispered fractionally lower, threatening to scandalize the icy sanctity of regulated order. It's true, these pioneers pirouetted their hearts out on the icy canvas while navigating a fine line between timeless grace and a straitjacket of customs, orchestrated by the rule-loving maestros of their era. And yet, how times have changed. Though without the falsetto of olden shushing or strictures so intricate they might have been cross-stitched, one can only admire how these daring skaters silently pushed against the boundaries. Their journeys, etched in ice, hinted at the winds of freedom and creativity that would eventually flurry in future decades, encouraging modern skaters to express their electric passions without infringement from bygone decorum. As we close the chapter on this elegantly regimented history, let us gently turn our thoughts to how these changes, pivotal and icebreaking as they were, paved the way for today's soaring leaps and liberated spins. Snuggle down further, for our next exploration will slowly uncloak more quirky secrets yet to be revealed behind that shimmering curtain of sports history. In the whimsical world of women's Olympic figure skating, where grace, glitter, and a cascade of perfect pirouettes reigned supreme. Behind the ice, there hummed a set of rules stricter than a Swiss figure skating judge with a magnifying glass. Picture this: an ever-evolving tapestry of regulations that dictated hairstyles, hemlines, and happiness, all as secretive as they were perplexing. Who knew that this elegant sport could echo the ambience of a high-stakes, bedazzled etiquette school? Amidst this swirling snow globe of rules was the notorious hemline code, a regulation that elegantly suggested skaters wear skirts resembling dainty whisper-filled clouds, long enough to maintain virtue, short enough to enable those triple axels. The debate over skirt length was a perpetual ice rink tango, with skaters navigating between modesty and freedom of movement. It was a balancing act, impressive enough without the added challenge of leaping into quadruple spins. Now imagine skaters arriving off the ice, ravenously tucking into the 1952 Helsinki Games buffet. But wait, eyebrows would raise at any who dared to reach for seconds, expanding not just their waistlines, but also the puritanical judgment of officials who deemed what skaters did off ice as crucial as their salchows and camels. The strict dietary expectations were served up with a side of scrutiny sharper than a newly purchased pair of skates. The unspoken rule: stay svelte, stay victorious, but most of all, stay in bounds with the dietary gospel. Of course, nothing encircles a strict set of guidelines, quite like hairstyles. Enter the coiffure conundrums, where the elegance of a bun could determine the very outcome of one's Olympic dreams. Anything that swayed with the movement of a pirouette in a less than graceful manner was frowned upon. Tresses must be tamed with the precision and severity reserved for military parades or competitive origami. Neatness was paramount, preparing skaters for battle, not just against each other, but against their own loose strands of hair. Costume design was another realm of strict supervision. Time traveling back to the early competitions, one would witness a curious paradox. Costumes shimmering with crystals while following dictates strict enough to curb even the most flamboyant seamstresses' enthusiasm. The indulgence of sparkly embellishments was in constant negotiation with the spirits of modesty and practicality. Sequins, while meant to dazzle, were not to outshine the skater herself, ensuring that no glare or glare-giving element outshone the performance. Yet amidst this rule-laden landscape, figure skaters were enchantresses of innovation, finding loopholes large enough for a double Lutz. They dared to push against edges, literally and metaphorically, reshaping the sport with each poetic plunge and soaring leap. With each enchanting performance, the skaters glided closer to artistic rebellion, feathered hemlines flickering against authority, eventually reshaping the sport into an art form of dazzling individuality. Then there were always the unspoken rules, like don't make your costume change into a transformative opera event halfway through a routine, unless, of course, you wanted your grand ideas stitched into legends of backstage gossip. Whispered stories of the daring ones who tested these rules are told like campfire tales. The attempted, unauthorized wardrobe adjustments were the gothic romance of the rink. It was much like a fairy tale reimagining of Little Red Riding Hood, where the skater wasn't sure if they should be gowned like grandma before the wolf arrived. As skaters soared over the ice, lifted by the great invisible hands of tradition, they carried these expectations with them, not merely as burdens, but as badges of honor. Their graceful fights against the confines wove a tapestry rich with irony and defiance, elevating the sport far beyond its icy canvas to one of powerful personal expression. And as today's skaters cut through the frosty rules with their edges sharp and determined, they are eternally twirled into the ever-unfolding history of this sport. It is a history that once constricted by rules and judgments now unfurls into beautiful arabesques of change. With the rink now dimming softly around them, those intricate tales of the past lead us gently onward, illuminated by only the delicate prisms of light dancing upon the ice. As we glide smoothly into the velvety world of figure skating in the mid-20th century, imagine a tiny cosmos where sequins twinkled brighter than the stars and skates carved sonnets into the glimmering ice. Yet beneath this sparkling facade lay a tangled web of rules that might make the most seasoned bureaucrat reach for a fainting couch. Among these rules was a fascinating one about skirts. Yes, skirts. Those twirling draperies became the focal point of much deliberation. In an era when societal norms were as rigid as the ice itself, female skaters were required to wear skirts of a specific length. An inch above the knee. Scandalous. A tad longer. Perfection. Judges would deliberate with laser-like focus, sometimes more on the hem than the triple axel. It's said that for every millimeter hemmed up, at least one nosy official cheerfully stitched up a potential scandal. And who were these skirt monitors, you ask? Men, naturally, who displayed boundless expertise in the field of women's fashion, having perhaps only encountered it through the kaleidoscopic pages of a Sears catalogue. Under their vigilant eyes, each costume was scrutinized. Did it sparkle sufficiently when twirled? Check. Was it distracting in its shimmer, possibly leading competitors to lose an entire bead sequence mid-jump? Definitely a deduction. The history of figure skating attire didn't stop at skirts. Our intrepid skaters were also wrapped up in a quagmire of sartorial elegance versus practicality. The advent of synthetic materials amidst the Great Depression was seen as both revolutionary and suspiciously space-age. All it took was one poorly timed wardrobe malfunction, possibly attributed to a devious prong on an unlaced skate, according to the legends, to ensure costume designers revisited their sketches, red pencils slashing elastics with furious precision. Indeed, being within the regulations was not merely about conformity, it was a dance with destiny at 6 revolutions per second. Knowing the rules inside out, skaters routinely had to charm their way on and off the ice, ensuring that not even an errant sequin escaped the judge's all-seeing eye. But fear not, dear listener. Amidst this labyrinthine world of ice pageantry, there were skaters who mastered the art of complying with flair and levity. A young star, known as Edith the Elegant, once famously sewed a hidden pocket into her costume, making it a delightful conveyor of smuggled lucky charms. Each jump would see a lucky rabbit's foot tossing mid-air. Mind you, it was purely decorative and not intended to influence the judge's sagacious stares. Alas, when queried about unauthorized tailoring, she simply replied, "It's just a bit of extra encouragement." As night falls ever deeper and your eyelids flutter like soft whispers on a winter night, imagine the scent of freshly sharpened blades, the gentle etching on ice, and the hush of excitement as skaters took to the stage. These women, artists in choreography and fashion under duress, twirled and leaped gracefully between the rules, creating movements that defied both gravity and tradition. In this grand choreography of contradictions, the glittering sheen of a well-fitted costume became almost as iconic as the performances themselves. If the ice was their canvas, then surely their outfits were the soaring brushstrokes, both adhering to and overcoming the constraints imposed by time and tailoring. And so, as we prepare to glide into another tale, think of those who balanced on blades not just for the honor and applause, but for the sheer joy of spiraling into a world of grace and humor. Not forgetting, of course, the precision of an impeccably placed hem. As the painted night gently envelops, keep your dreams skimming lightly upon this icy canvas, awaiting the next silky skater's tale to reveal itself. Beneath the dizzying lights of the ice rink, where every glide and twirl appears as effortless as a breeze, lies a remarkable tale of sartorial stipulations that once ruled the world of women's Olympic skating. Our quiet journey tonight skates us back to an era where clothing regulations weren't just a suggestion, but the very strings that puppeteered performances. Imagine, if you will, the early decades of the 20th century, a time when women's fashion was more about liberation than airtime. Yet, for the graceful women who dared to compete on the Olympic ice, their attire was governed by a set of rules that made the Magna Carta look positively carefree. Official directives dictated not just how much one should cover, but also precisely how dazzling, or not, one might dare to be. The International Skating Union, known for their enthralling meetings on coat buttons, kept skaters on a rather short leash. You see, in those not-so-distant days, women skaters had to adhere to a hemline that mustn't reveal any hint of knee, which, as we know, is scandalous terrain indeed. Perhaps they believed the sight of a bare knee could distract judges, or worse, melt the ice itself. So, there they were, crafting movements of elegance, all while practicing proper modesty. The rulebook was their cloak, wrapped tightly around them, figuratively speaking, lest they risk the tragedy of a wardrobe malfunction. Yet fashion is a sly fox, as we all know. It sneaks through crevices of convention and reinvents itself. Skaters, naturally, found ways to both obey and nudge the edges of these stern guidelines. Enter the advent of flesh-colored fabric. This clever little trick offered the illusion of daring without breaching modesty, making it perfectly acceptable, mind you, in the eyes of regulation elders. The creative seamstresses of the skating world toiled as unsung heroines, finding ways to sew magic into permitted materials. Sequins, after all, were still permitted, those tiny, twinkling contraband, shimmering on sleeves and skirts. And so, the skaters twirled lovingly into our memories, dazzling under the careful watch of modesty's hawk-eyed overseers. Now, as legend would have it, there was an infamous coat check debacle at the 1924 Chamonix Olympics. Stories vary, but the best synonymous with hypnotic tale suggests that a particularly brave skater dared to step onto the ice sans the required jacket. The judges gasped, hats were clutched, assumptions were made. Yet, miraculously, the sky did not fall and the world continued to turn. Her daring yet discreet challenge might have been the first silent plea for relaxation of the rules, a soft revolution in place of reverent submission. Still, change skates upon thin ice, does it not? Each daring costume's evolution was like a wink, shared between vigilant rule enforcers and those seeking freedom of expression. But slowly, over decades, the walls of restriction crumbled. The skaters moved from resembling porcelain dolls to athletic dancers, the essence of the sport evolving with every ruffle and rhinestone. There's a delightful irony wrapped within these stories, as what was once forbidden has become gloriously celebrated. Today, performance robes are as much about personal flair and storytelling as they are about the triple axels and lutzes they accompany. It's a world where innovation swirls with tradition, creating a mesmerizing dance of its own. As we skate gracefully towards slumber, let us give a quiet nod to those enterprising women who did more than just perform a triple toe loop into the annals of history. Their grace and ingenuity sowed the seeds for the freedom that would eventually allow creativity to fly across the ice, unchecked by antiquated notions of decorum, with the whisper of history's hemline still rustling in the echoes of ice rinks the world over. It is time to softly close our eyes, drift further into dreams, and wonder gently about the next pages we'll traverse together. In the realm of glistening ice and whispered stories, we find ourselves gliding into the world of women's Olympic figure skating, a venue where grace and precision pirouetted beneath a frosty gaze of strict traditions. Now picture this. It's 1940-something, and you've just been crowned the figure skating champion of your local pond. Next stop, surely international glory. But wait, there's a labyrinth of rules, so involved and intricate, you'd think they were written by an obsessive clockmaker with plenty of time but not much enthusiasm for skating. Ah, the dresses. Did you know that for decades they were an epicenter of controversy and control? In the pre-1980s, women were expected to wear skirts of a modest length, a phrase that sounds as if it was conjured up by medieval tailors trying not to faint at the sight of an ankle. These modest hems were like rules borrowed from some dusty library of time, with overseers on a mission to ensure no hemline ran too wild. A skater's outfit was expected to meet the 2 inches above the knee mandate, a specification as precise as the trajectory of a double axel, and similarly scrutinized. But the wardrobe wouldn't dare hoggle the rules. Enter the smorgasbord of prohibitions that had a whiff of the old grandpa grumbling about back in my day. There was an era when female skaters were not allowed to sport pantsuits or trousers. Egad, imagine. The uproar of a woman swathed in comfortable, practical attire might have collapsed an ice rink from sheer scandalous shock. One can almost hear a commentator from an imaginary 1952 event exclaiming in grave tones, "Oh dear, she's not in the regulation skirt. Fetch the smelling salts." Simple tap of humor among the icy riggers. Speaking of routines, there were times when skaters were handed down an unwritten rule with the gravity of a prophecy. Do not smile excessively. Apparently, showing one's molars, midlets, might melt the ice quicker than a sunbeam. Judges preferred a serene elegance, the kind of serene that one might adopt when reading a placid novel by the fireside. Very Zen meets winter wonderland. Astoundingly, the expression was judged almost as sharply as a double toe loop. Forget to point a toe and risk a furrowed brow from the panel, but heaven forbid you should flash a toothy grin. Now, onto the hairstyle edicts that hovered over hopefuls like a stern aunt with a brush at an awful family photo shoot. Hair was to be tamed, controlled, as if it were just a little too daring left unfettered. The bun was the order of the day, tight enough to lift your eyebrows an extra sweaty inch. Should a stray curl escape, one might imagine a deduction whispered across the judge's table in tones typically reserved for late fees at the local library. As we continue our cozy waltz around these historical particulars, let's not forget the seemingly innocuous requirement of the crisp announcement. Yes, before those gliding beauties even started their spins, their full names and countries were announced with the formal gravity of a royal decree. Every name, from Smith of America to the more tongue-twisting international titles, glided across the speaker system with all the grandeur one could muster. Perhaps it was meant to herald the arrival of the next ice princess or king. Or maybe it was just in case they slipped, and everyone was left wondering who took that unexpected tumble. Envisioning this era, when skaters sliced through scrutiny as finely as they did the ice, draws us to the realization of how immense each seemingly delicate performance truly was. It was a delicate dance, not just with physics and artistry, but with the expectations layered like the warmest of quilts upon their impossibly slender shoulders. But still they skated, daring to challenge conventions with every leap and landing. And with that, we pause on the pristine silence of the rink's edge, a snow globe moment of history and humor amalgamated in ice and time. As you tuck yourself more snugly into your blanket, let us dream forward with quiet thoughts of the unravelments yet to unfold on this adventurous journey of rules and revolutions, each turn ahead as soft and promising as a winter's first snow. As the moonlight unfurls its silver carpet across a gently frosted lake, it's time for us to tiptoe, like the ever-graceful figure skaters of yesteryears, into the twirling tales of women's Olympic skating rules. Ah, a realm where sequins sparkled brighter than common sense, and strict guidelines dictated every glide, lest the universe falter at an improperly executed spin. Picture it. The early days of women's figure skating, the precipice of the roaring 1920s, a time where fashion flirted with liberation, yet skating rules clung fervently to the corset strings of restraint. Those daring female pioneers didn't just navigate frozen surfaces. They pirouetted through a labyrinth of regulations that no choreography could unravel. Skate sharp, for this chapter, should you skim too quickly, may leave a skater in the dust. The story unfolds with the dance card of attire. Picture your average 1920s flapper gazing longingly at her towering hemline, only to be told that on the ice, she must sheath herself in ankle-length skirts. Heaven forbid you show an ankle. Such scandal might melt the ice beneath your very blades. An audacious move, those ankle-length skirts, which took ambition to new heights, occasionally sending skaters tripping over their textile waterfalls. Next comes the anatomy of the skates themselves. Legend has it that during the 1920s, skate blades were closer to scimitar swords than streamlined runners. Competitors hoped their sharpened crescent moons might propel them to victory, or at least keep them upright and their skirts unsnaggled. The art was less about completing a triple axel and more about surviving the competition without a lace or hem coming undone. Equally precise were the protocols governing hair and headgear. Alas, the helmet hair of yore was a knitted catastrophe, designed not to protect, but to restrain any rebellious curl that dared to perform its own aerial tricks. Since aerodynamic coiffures were yet a figment of imagination, skaters donned tight buns, occasionally accessorized by a modest hat. No feathers, mind you, for fear they may take flight faster than the skater beneath them. But amongst these bylaws walked the confounding rule of no theatrics, with officials puckering their brows at anything more exuberant than an exaggerated wave. Inventiveness on ice had to tread cautiously. A stern tut from the judge's bench awaited. Any move perceived as too delightfully dramatic, or indeed, too victorious in verve. Then came the saga of the off-ice rituals. As each competition loomed, participants were not only expected to rehearse their jumps and spins, but also demonstrate a proficiency in ladylike demeanor. Chaperones loomed over chit-chats, and spinsters, those on the ice, joined skilled spinners on the dance floors of accompanying galas, each twirl another test of etiquette to ensure embodiments of grace, both on and off the rink. Despite these constraints, whispers of rebellion, soft as a skater's breath, sharp as a blade edge, began wafting through the skating community. Change waltzed gracefully onto the ice, slowly melting the restrictive stature of unwieldy skirts and wearying decorum. As evening descends and your eyelids grow heavy, imagine a world where freshness crackled like new ice underfoot and where every glide whispered promises of change. Our skaters, resolute like winter itself, had begun to dream of shorter skirts beneath northern lights, harboring those daring ambitions of flamboyant jumps and festive hemlines, though the full saga awaits. And as we gracefully slide onto our next chapter, let sleepier minds ponder the shadowed dancers of ice a little longer under the moonlit sky, letting dreams of gentle rebellion and whimsical freedom drift into their slumber. Let us glide effortlessly into the intricate world of women's Olympic figure skating, an arena that has long sparkled with beauty, grace, and a rather bewildering set of rules that brought a certain chiseled rigor to the serene ice. Imagine a gathering of elegant swans skirting along a pond's edge, but with a stern committee of ducks checking their feathers for regulation-compliant shades of white. Once upon a not-so-distant past, Olympic figure skating was governed by a suite of regulations so elaborate you might suspect they were designed by an army of bored clockmakers eager to amuse themselves with grand TikTok machinations over the wondrous simplicity of skating. First, nothing says lovely ice poetry like mandating minimum skirt lengths. Yes, you heard right. The rulers of icy elegance perched from their plush seats believed that the charm of a perfect axle jump could only truly be appreciated if performed in a skirt at least 2/3 the length of, say, a hockey stick. The reasoning, possibly locked deep in misty archives, was perhaps to prevent an unintentional breeze in a leap turning the performance into avant-garde dance. Now, as you tuck your feet snugly under the covers, consider the footwear regulations, a timeless ploy founded to ensure that no human would dare assume these skaters float magically on the ice without the aid of skates of scientifically measured robustness. Skaters, laces inspected to a T, were expected not to craftily deploy rollerblades under girlish charm and glitter. No, the authority over skates was to remain as firm as a Herculean grip on a stray hockey puck, slyly sliding invited to a rival bench. Equally amusing was the enforcement of a rule regarding body weight, not because they wished to sneak in wrestling, but to keep the skaters within the delicate shape envisioned by Renaissance artists when painting Venus in motion across a silver sea. What is a little celestial elegance disrupted by a sneaky weighing scale, brought upon the innocent, snowy preface of an actual competition? The garments stipulated must have been fashioned by a scholar of antiquities, dedicated to making sure every glittering costume could also stand in ancient courts without a scandal. Their shimmering visage had to declare modesty, even in a quad salcho, parry a jewel away here, raise a neckline there, like negotiating with a tailor who moonlights as a modesty inspector extra part-time. Bewildering as these may seem, the strict choreography did not escape the musings of the humble fancy dress. A spray here, a tool there, and with a twirl, it was a canvas painted under Maestro Michelangelo's scrutiny. The trickiest of these chimeras was to delight the eyes, yet never vex them with too bold a flash or too open a shoulder. Oh, and let us not forget the hair, styled to perfection like a duchess's ball-ready crown, computed in curls and bobby pins by those who thought Rapunzel had clearly cut corners in her own tail-tangled tower escape. Unseen committees would tick off plaits as precisely as judging their figure eights. Each skater, as poised as an enchanted winter swan, spun her spells upon the frost under these rules. They still sparkled, shoulders back, heads held high, and therein lay their art, each pirouette an avowal that beauty stood undefeated amidst regulation revolutionaries. As you find your heavy eyelids succumbing to the gentle lull of night, let your mind drift, wrap yourself in shallow ice dreams, and skate toward the forthcoming secrets that only the silent winds of the past hint upon. In the soothing world of ice, where blades whisper their frosty secrets to the rink below, a unique story of elaborate rules floats into our hearing. With a hint of prowess and a smidgen of humor, let us unravel a period in women's figure skating when the ivory-towered officials seem bent on blending aesthetics with a great deal of peculiarity. Picture, if you will, Olympic figure skating of yore, where what lay beneath the immaculate costumes was as tightly controlled as the jumps and spins themselves. It wasn't enough for these graceful daredevils to enrapture the audience with their spirals and axles. Oh no, they had to play by a rulebook that sometimes bordered on the absurd. First, let us glide across the ice to the 1960s, when skating dresses adhered to regulations so stiff they might as well have been carved from ice themselves. Modesty in hemline length was of utmost importance. If a skirt dared to raise an inch too high, it could lead to deductions. And the very idea of shorts, or heaven forbid, trousers, could lead to outright disqualification. As you rest your head to sink into slumber, imagine the giggles and the gasp of scandal had one of those pioneering skaters decided to break the mold with a pair of jolly culottes. As the 1970s unfolded with its vibrant colors and experimental spirit, one would think the ice would reflect such freedom. Yet, governing bodies kept a diligent eye on skating attire. Sequins had to shimmer just right, necklines to be no lower than what was deemed appropriate. Skaters essentially became moving art exhibits, balancing between expressing their individuality and adhering to the sometimes finicky dictates of formality. So as we tenderly drift across the snow-dappled paths of memory, consider those sequins as tiny guardians of traditional elegance, sparkling soldiers of sporting decorum. It wasn't just costumes that invited the precise scrutiny of officialdom. one had to consider every aspect, down to the painted fingernails. Yes, painted nails could paint an unfair picture, tipping scales, as it was thought, through the alleged bias of color choice. If you were perhaps hoping to catch a lucky judge's eye with a blazing trail of scarlet fingertips, it was considered a risky stratagem. Subtlety, dear dreamers, was the name of the game, lest you inadvertently distracted from the artistry of your triple lutz. Moving along the sparkling ice, meet the men who dared to opine on these matters, the judges, who were an eclectic array of personalities. Some might relay tales of judges who nodded off mid-competition. Perhaps they were lured into siestas by the gentle rhythm of the skate's orchestrated sound, or perhaps by boredom. Who knows? But did it matter? A 6.0 was a 6.0, even if given in a sleepy stupor. These peculiar boundaries that seemingly confined the potential of women's skating transformed over the decades as athletes began to advocate for their own creativity. Like dainty ice sprites, they started etching their names into the slippery surfaces without the weight of overly rigid traditions holding them back. They carved out spaces that allowed for the creativity and flair we now admire. Before you peacefully drift fully into slumber, let us thank the brave skaters who managed to navigate both a physical and an artistic journey under vigilant, sometimes whimsical restrictions. It's these pioneers who smoothed the icy path for today's athletes. So as your thoughts fly softly to join the gentle snow outside, prepare yourself to glide into the next chapter of this serene voyage of icy tales. As the twilight of our tale descends, we find ourselves gliding into the shimmering world of the 1950s Olympic ice skating scene, where the strict rules governing women's performances were as delicate and rigid as the lace adorning their costumes. Ah yes, here we are in a sport where everything from the tip of your blade to the pin in your hair was scrutinized with such precision that it could make an accountant's ledger look like an artist's abstract splash. Imagine, if you will, the cool air of the rink kissing your cheeks, while you attempt a graceful spin under the watchful eyes of the Olympic judges. These esteemed figures were not simply observing your artistry, but were in fact armed with measuring tapes, poised to check if your skirt hem was falling into a rebellious flutter above the 2 inches allowed above your knee. Heaven forbid should your ensemble liberate itself from the confines of propriety. Such a faux pas could cost you not just deductions, but a firm letter of disapproval from the sartorial powers that be. In this chilly spectacle of discipline, women skaters were bound by more than just the expectation of a perfect triple axel. They were equipped with costume regulations that rivaled the Queen's protocol manual. Oh, the colors and sequins had to be modest, for too much sparkle was seen as a distraction, a notion only true to those who had never been to a New Year's Eve party. And your music choices. Dare you tempt the fates with a flamboyant jazz number? Best to stick with a safe Tchaikovsky, or, if feeling adventurous, a tender Vivaldi, lest the jury's stoic brows drop a centimeter in disapproval. Yet the grandeur did not stop at attire. Behold, the hair. Every curl, every bun was an architectural feat, requiring a scaffold of bobby pins strong enough to secure the Eiffel Tower in a hurricane. These were the days before the mighty scrunchie reigned, a time when a stray lock of hair could be deemed almost as catastrophic as a missed jump. And speaking of hair-raising feats, let us not forget the obligatory smile etched across the skaters' faces, the kind that one might still muster even while spiraling towards an unfortunate tangle with the ice. It takes an iron will and nerves of steel to slip gracefully and smile through a potential faceplant, much like a seasoned cat burglar who unswervingly juggles his loot whilst dangling from a rooftop. Our tale isn't just woven with rules, it dances with the resilience and grace of women who adapted to these stringent demands, transforming them into an expression of pure art that sparkled brighter than any added diamond dust to their costumes. This era of skating, though seemingly bound by the rigidity of its own making, was one that planted seeds of creativity, seeds that would eventually grow into the daring performances and fiery self-expression embraced in modern skating arenas. as the dreamy ice beneath our feet begins to melt under the gentle glow of our sleepy sun, let us glide quietly onward, knowing that these tales of yesteryear, intricate as the finest lace, continue to whisper sweetly into the annals of history, inviting us to ponder what lays ahead. Who knows? Perhaps the story that follows will be as delightfully peculiar as the one that just was. Let us drift now, ever so smoothly, into the embrace of what comes next. The peculiar world of women's Olympic figure skating, a place where grace meets gravity in a harmonious, heart-stopping ballet upon the blade-thin edge of a knife. As we glide into a new chapter of this chilly chronicle, let us drift softly into the whispered rules that have pirouetted through the pages of figure skating history like a forgotten snowflake on a gentle winter breeze. Once upon a time, in the land of sequins and double axels, the arbiters of women's figure skating decided that fashion should be as frigid as the ice itself. Thus, the Handbook of Pristine Posture and Demeanor, a most hypnotizing name, decreed strict dress codes, demanding decorum from skaters who were, quite literally, walking on ice. A twirl, a spin, and a tug on a bright red leotard could lead to disqualification if the attire strayed too far towards the avant-garde or scandalous. The fishnet stockings of today were frowned upon more than an unaligned toe loop. Every plunging neckline was seen as a potential threat to the victory podium. One might think they were more concerned with fabric than choreography. Those rule makers seemed to hear Vivaldi in the rustle of skirts and saw sheet music in each pleat. Despite those constraints, our skaters, those icy sirens, danced on with remarkable resilience. And let's not forget the makeup regulations, or as some called them, the war paint protocols. No flashy shades or bright hues that could distract the unsuspecting judges. Perhaps they feared the judges, mesmerized by a bold red lipstick, might lose focus and award points to its maven instead of the skater. No matter, female skaters became masters of subtlety, twirling through blush and shadows, painting their expressions with as much artistry as their jumps. Despite these stringent appearances, one rule rewrote the very heart of their performance. Judges, those solemn emperors seated high above the ice, once controlled the music, even selection. Skaters had little say in what symphonic breaths would sweep them over the frosty canvas. Imagine an athlete taking to the ice with Tchaikovsky, whispering in their ears, while perhaps yearning for the swing of Gershwin or the storytelling magic of Rimsky-Korsakov. Yet like all good stories in history, time passed and the voices of change echoed through colder corridors. The skaters began to have a say, allowing their routines to bloom with music that touched not just the ice, but their very spirits. In the silent revolution of sound, the music began to be as much a part of the skater as the blades beneath them. And sitting below the surface of all these sartorial and symphonic restrictions lay the ultimate aspiration: victory. Victory not only against competitors, but over fears and doubts, the twin specters flitting invisibly through every routine. Victory, symbolized by small shimmering medals which occasionally resembled the very sequins that were once so scrutinized on their dresses. Yet, from the brink of midnight, as our imaginations swirl like breath on a frosty pane, we can see these skaters reclaiming their newfound freedom. With each jump, spin, and crackling glissade, they defied the gravity of antiquated rules to become not just athletes, but artists. This, dear dreamers, is the footprint of progress. And although the ice may be cold, the stories it holds are warm, inviting, and perpetually whispering to those who choose to listen. With that, we gently drift to the edge of our cozy, icebound tale, and the shimmer of Chapter 22 is but a twinkling promise on the horizon. Let the lull of historical whimsy guide you forward into deeper dreams and hidden histories. Sweetest dreams, dear listener, as the ice rink of your imagination remains uncrowded, and the enchanting echoes of skating legends crisscross softly into slumber, as the moon casts its gentle glow over the ice rink of yesteryears, we glide back to the frost-bitten history of women's Olympic skating, specifically to the curious constraints that swirled around like a twirling skater in the spotlight. Picture this. It's the mid-20th century, and the Olympics have become the pinnacle of human athletic grace. Ice skating, with its shimmering dresses and dazzling spins, is the belle of the ball. However, beneath the glamour lies a labyrinth of rules with more twists than a triple axel. The rules for women's skating attire might have given Leonardo da Vinci pause in their complexity. Skaters were expected to don skirts that flowed no shorter than the knee, and, surprisingly, for a time, pants were deemed as scandalous as attempting a jump sequence after a hearty sandwich. Ironically, while stringently ensuring every inch of the attire was respectable, it became directly proportional to the level of discomfort. Imagine performing a perfect single loop in a frock as heavy as a history textbook. Oh, but the sartorial stipulations were just the tip of the iceberg. There were rules about hair that would make Rapunzel reconsider her choices. Only the kind of genteel hairstyles that would make your grandmother nod with approval were permitted. Heaven forbid a stray hair defied gravity mid-spin. The 1960s brought a chilly breeze of change, where glitzy costumes began to challenge the old guard's vision of demure elegance. Fringed dresses began to shake their way into the arena, evolving faster than anyone could say, camel spin. However, the Rules Committee, as steadfast as a well-centered skate blade, doubled down with their rulebook in tow, preparing for every fashion contingency, as if each ruffle might bring untold chaos to the rink. And then there were those impossible elements lists, dictated from on high as ceaselessly as an eternal skate. The Federation decreed which jumps, spins, and step sequences were deemed worthy of their illustrious ice time. Fancy a quadruple Lutz? One must wait, for such lofty aspirations belong to a future where overachievement was rewarded, not lightly scolded. While today's freestyle feats whip past us like a breeze through a moonlit night, back then, creativity was to be correctly and judiciously balanced within the realm of the judge's favor. That is, provided everyone, miraculous as this sounds, managed to agree on what constituted flair. And yet, it's those stern regulations that contributed as much to the skater's discipline as to their artistry. There's a certain poise gained only by mastering one's craft within a web of restrictions woven with a fine thread of absurdity. Those rules may have echoed with the solemnity of a judge's gavel, but they unintentionally knit a delicate dance of defiance and elegance that endowed each performance with its own quiet rebellion. As our historical ice skate glides to the end of the rink tonight, we catch a glimpse of this restrictive era, beginning to crack like ice in spring. The path carved by determined blades carries on into a future where skaters would daringly break through ceilings made of glass, ice, and antiquated rules alike. So, my gentle listener, as you drift into the embrace of sleep, consider the quiet revolutions that stirred from beneath the ice, heralding the coming of a more liberating world. Rest easy in this knowledge, for soon, more stories await. As the moon cast its enchanting glow over a world slowly drifting to slumber, we delve into the peculiar world of women's figure skating, a place where grace and discipline interlace like the finest stitches on an antique skating dress. For decades, choreographers of this elegant sport were not only concerned with the triple axel, but also with an entire compendium of rules so intricate that they could very well rival any royal decree. Now, let's glide through time as silently as a pair of freshly sharpened skates cutting through a pristine sheet of ice. In the early days of competitive figure skating, the rules could wax poetic about the most curious details. The stage was set in 1902 at a time when Madge Syers, a British skater, dared to enter a men's competition, frankly, because there was no rule against it. But fear not, gentle listeners. This wasn't an act of rebellion, but rather an accidental precedent. The officials soon established a separate category for women, understanding the inevitable danger, apparently, of letting women compete with men. lest they lose in spectacular and overly graceful fashion. As crochet and skating often waltzed hand in hand back then, women were initially required to appear in ensembles straight out of a Jane Austen fever dream, with skirts brushing elegantly against the tops of their boots. These lovely garments were not merely for the aesthetics. Oh no, they served as nature's parachute, protecting modesty and making even a minor jump an exciting aerodynamic event. However, this isn't to say that these skaters weren't agile. They were, just agile in a way that involved an extraordinary amount of fabric management. Beyond the skirts that could double as unfurled sails, came the era in which skating costumes evolved. Hemlines crept slowly upwards, inch by controversial inch. By the 1920s and 30s, skaters were finally afforded a glimpse of the practicality of shorter, albeit still respectable skirts. The battle of the hem was waged not only on the ice, but within the hallowed halls of athletic committees who feared, with grave seriousness, that too much leg would lead to an utter societal collapse, or at least to a rather heated discussion over a polite cup of tea. Our heroines of the ice also contended with off-ice edicts that dictated everything from hairstyle to behavior. Yes, the curls had to be just right, lest they throw off the delicate balance of the universe. Hairpins and hairspray became as indispensable as skates themselves, so much so that one might imagine entire support staff dedicated to the upkeep of the perfect bun. After all, the poise and elegance meant not a single hair could escape its designated path, lest it collide with the universe's grand harmony. Now, dear listener, as you feel your eyelids grow heavy, consider the silent battles waged by these ice queens. While they spun and twizzled across the ice, beneath their serene facades were hearts emboldened by determination and a stubborn refusal to be seen as an accessory to their own sport. Skaters possess a history characterized by not bending to draconian guidelines, pushing the limits of expression while cloaked under deceptive calmness and choreographed grace. Picture the scene: a serene winter's eve, snow falling as delicate as the lace once worn by our daring skaters of old. Each figure, each leap, once prescribed within a tightly bound notion of femininity, now contributing to the balletic dynamism that redefines womanhood with every routine. As collective memories dance and twirl around your dreams, remember these athletes as both artists and warriors, defining each decade through the glittering lens of ice and strength. And now, as the story slips gently into the hush of night, let us prepare for a final chapter where the rules have melted away, like the frost vanishing beneath morning's gentle sunlight, and only the enduring spirit of the skater remains, a beacon, a trailblazer, forever a glinting star upon ice. Ah, dear listener, as we glide into the final chapter of our journey through the twirling world of Olympic skating, with all its lace and elegance, let us imagine a cinematic parade of sequined athletes who dared to challenge the shimmering, frosty glass ceiling above the ice. As the 20th century unfurled its chaotic yet captivating plot, the rulebooks overseeing women's Olympic skating bore testimony not just to the art of the sport, but to an era hell-bent on confining grace within a well-manicured box. Fortunately, our heroines, though cloaked in the obligatory tulle and satin, had nimbleness not only in their ankles, but also in their minds, mastering the art of rule navigation with the sly brilliance of an Arctic fox out for a midnight saunter. The final decades of these peculiar codes saw figures like Katarina Witt gliding through bureaucratic red tape as smoothly as a triple axel, amassing medals with the same ease that some collect stamps. Witt once ruffled more than a few feathers with her iconic 1988 Carmen routine, an act dripping with dramatic flair and emotional intensity. Her choreography virtually challenged the line that dictated precisely how much passion was permissible before the judges had to reach for their fainting couches. Witt's calculated risks were allegorical performances as much as athletic ones, laps of defiance against the ruling norms and vocalized whispers that change was not only possible, it was all but inevitable. And change, much like a wayward Zamboni, destined to smooth the ice, continued steadily forward, coaxing the Olympic stage into its democratic future. Behind her, skaters like Christy Yamaguchi and Michelle Kwan took the baton. Christy pirouetted with the grace that implied that camels should spin as effortlessly as dish tops, while Michelle, a sedate bearer of grace and poise, carved elegance into ice with blades that promised dreams that could not be fenced by dictums on necklines. The dawn of the new millennium slowly began to chip away at the firm grip of yesterday's wintry fingers. As the notion of women's roles unfurled beyond the rink, shedding fripperies much like an icicle shedding water as it melts, the athletes' ambitions were unfettered, unbuttoned, and finally free. By the 2000s, rules loosened. The old manuals began to look as old-fashioned as a rotary phone in the age of smartphones, bemusing in a museum like yesterday. Imagine, if you will, a young woman today, lacing up her skates, less concerned about the length of her skirt, and more focused on the possibility of her own limitlessness. The arenas now echo with the anticipation of feats yet unseen, pas de chats with the invisible boundaries of fear folding under footwork and heartbeats tracing designs by the light of the moon. And as the chapter of strict restrictions closes, so too does this final chapter of our serene story. Picture a Zamboni gliding across ice, polishing the surface to a pure shine, much like the glow of understanding you may now carry with you. As you drift into a restful sleep, remember that history, much like the rink, is cyclical, vast, and often, when examined closely, far from boring. With that, we say not goodbye, but good night, leaving you to dream of past wonders and future possibilities, of skaters unfurling on ice under soft moonlit canopies of sky. Sweet dreams, dear listener, as you drift away.